we almost need to build a bridge between the current and the future. Investing to address the historic legacy of deprivation in communities that do not have access to services, investing in changing the way in which our city works, and therefore an ability to invest in the corridors, replenishing aging infrastructure. We can resolve the now, but let's build a different city of the future.
When you're dealing with spatial transformation, you must deal with the fundamental issues of economic and social segregation. So the two are not necessarily two separate processes. They are parts of a very singular process of transformation, and one cannot overemphasize the need for it to be dealt with comprehensively.
How do we transform the urban space? If we do so, are we doing it in a positive way or are we doing it in a negative way? We have a history where it was done in a negative way, and so it resulted in the fragmentation that we have.
Johannesburg is one of the world's youngest cities. It's got youth, energy and vibrancy. What apartheid really did was destroy much of that youth, much of the potential of the city, by putting people into containers.
The apartheid legacy used a range of different methodologies in order to segregate people, but in order to do so from a policy perspective, it needed to manifest that spatially. And using where people reside was effectively the tool that was used to do so.
Communities broken down in racial groups, living in different parts of the city.
The traditional apartheid city in the model was obviously using infrastructure to separate people. So you have highways, transport systems, railway systems to keep race groups apart.
We've got very long commute distances, we've got very low densities, and we don't have a lot of mixed land uses.
It's a very inefficient city.
You could find somebody coming all the way from Vosloorus working in Kempton Park. That is a huge distance.
To undo all of that and to plan around that is not an easy task.
Even when you've worked through the racial dimension in South Africa, you still have to face the question of what kind of city you want, what kind of economy you want, how are people going to work there?
Transit-oriented development is one of the most exciting new approaches to the restructuring of cities. It's been used very effectively in many parts of the world.
You get development along transit or along transport lines.
Taxi ranks, bus ranks, train stations, airports, any transit infrastructure allows you to cluster a particular type of land uses, but also to achieve much higher efficiencies.
You can start integrating social and economic opportunities along those corridors, and I think it's an efficient way of doing it.
Many cities have gone through transit-oriented development corridors as a means of development over a long period of time, and they've experienced urban regeneration.
Think about it, when you're in a station or when you're transitioning either between one mode of transport to another, you can do your nails quickly, you can do your hair quickly, you can grab your groceries on your way from home. Now imagine if your home was a walking distance to the transit infrastructure.
Assembling land is not an easy business.
We can't make extra land. And so the little that we have, we ought to be using it quite efficiently.
We shouldn't just think about expanding the city, leveraging land by finding new land on the edge of the city. We've got to intensify the use of the land we've got in the city.
Whether it is local government or national and provincial government, the state still owns fair amounts of land, and it's important that that land is used optimally to contribute to spatial transformation.
In terms of the typology, I think it's going to be different than what South Africans and particularly Joburgers are generally used to. I think we're going to see an increase in density, which means a reduction in size.
The question is, how can you start to bring the private and the public sector into a more effective land assembly role, not just for human settlements, but those supporting social amenities we've talked about, the schools, the clinics. How do all these guys start to coordinate their efforts?
And there are huge opportunities. I mean, we can look around us. We see vacant pieces of land. We see pieces of derelict buildings. We can see places where we can go 3 or 4 stories high. We can do a lot to make our city more intense, more exciting, more economically successful through densifying and intensifying.
Everyone says that a healthy mind can only exist in a healthy body. Now, the physical environment has a direct bearing on whether our bodies are healthy or not.
For a very long time, we thought just providing a 4-roomed house in some area is the solution. The problem is there's more to it than just a shelter.
It's not just about affordable housing, it's also about how do we create opportunities for small businesses.
The other key component is sufficient social infrastructure. That has a huge bearing on how the family structure functions.
Public space making.
One of the first shockers in coming to Johannesburg was the fact that I felt as if I didn't get a sense of the city or what the city was all about. A sense of missing the streetscape. That you could actually have a street that you could walk through and encounter other humans doing what humans do, whether it has to do with the kind of transport network that we have or has to do with about the kind of cities that we've created. I do think that we've tended to create the inside city and we've forgotten about the outside city.
The reality is that the private sector creates privatized public space through shopping malls. So it's no accident that there's poor social cohesion because there's actually an absence of spaces where poor and rich people of different backgrounds can interact and not be underneath the gaze of a developer.
I think mobility is a very critical issue when you're talking about sustainable human settlements, but when you're talking about spatial transformation.
Mobility is not a privilege, it is a right.
Think about your everyday life, what you do when you get up. Mobility is absolutely central to our lives.
Economically active and economically successful cities and towns have a proper transport system.
We really want to see public transport being able to help people to get affordably, quickly, reliably and safely to their places.
Mobility on the back of a mass transit system, a public transportation system, makes for a more efficient urban system.
Design is critical for the transformation of cities because it creates the framework against which the economy and infrastructure and civil society is able to act.
I'm a strong believer in that one of the problems in South Africa is that designers have been excluded from actual decision-making, from playing a meaningful role in these processes.
Design, especially urban design, is very important for inclusive mobility and inclusive city. A lot of times we build large infrastructure without thinking of the little design that matters to people who actually use the infrastructure.
Very often people think that design is something that you add at the end of a process to make something look pretty, whereas in fact design is the logic of the city and how it is structured.